guys, and welcome back to another vintage radio restoration. This time we're going to look at the Model 107 from the Pacific Radio Company of Wellington, New Zealand. It's a 7-valve set, AM broadcast band only, and it has one particularly unusual feature labelled noise suppression control that we're going to take a look at in some detail and try and work out what the engineers were going for. But first, a little background. In 1933, Radio Corporation of New Zealand, a company only in its infancy but growing in a manner that befitted its grand title, pooled its resources with the fledgling radio sales division of Stewart Hardware. Stewart's had been selling Courtenay branded radios that were made for them by Radio Corp for about the last 3 years. The results of this amalgamation, which saw Radio Corp taking possession of 3 floors of the new Stewart Hardware building in Courtenay Place, was the formation of a rebranded Stewart's Hardware and Tools, and more importantly, the new radio sales and marketing company, Courtenay Radio Ltd. At the same time, a new company, the Pacific Radio Company Limited, came into existence. In fact, the same time is almost an understatement, given that the Evening Post press releases of both companies were adjacent to each other and almost word-for-word identical. It's purely speculation nearly 90 years later, but given the timing and the similarities between those notices, Pacific Radio was probably formed by someone close to the Courtenay Radio Group, perhaps an executive of Stewart Hardware Limited who branched out on his own during the reshuffle. The move and subsequent expansion would have been an expensive operation, and Radio Corp would have been looking for ways to grow and to improve their income streams. And so for the next few years, they built radios for a number of different companies alongside their Courtenay production, and this included sets for the newly minted Pacific Radio Company Limited. The first sets from Pacific were a mixed bag, some quite ornate, while others fairly plain, but their designs were typical of the day, both physically and electrically. They started strong with nationwide advertising, and in short order they had a long list of dealers up and down the country. The 1934 Pacific lineup contained some radical departures from the previous year. They still maintained some traditional designs, but Art Deco was the word of the day. You can see from this 1934 advert in the New Zealand Radio Record that the Model 107 was somewhat of a flagship in that range, and available in both tabletop and console versions. Both are similar in appearance, although the console features a wooden grille, while the tabletop grille is chrome. The 107 is a striking example of Art Deco, and nothing else in New Zealand radio manufacturing even came close at that time. Of course, there was one final step up for Pacific. The following year would see them produce a console that is still recognised worldwide as one of the best radio cabinet designs of all time. The Pacific Elite, a set that's also known as the Mae West, although that nickname also applied to the Emerson model BD197 from the US. I'll leave it up to your imagination to try and figure out why in both cases. Okay, well, enough about the Elite. That one can keep for a future video. In retrospect, one might almost think Pacific lost its way in the years following these incredible designs. While the engineering of the chassis from Radio Corp was typically very good, the company's final 2 years in operation produced fairly run-of-the-mill cabinet designs with no real surprises. Certainly the Art Deco period was over. Of course, it's possible that what we see today as amazing design hadn't sold particularly well in the conservative New Zealand of 1934. In fact, inspection of serial numbers from Pacific sets of that era shows that all were under 1,000. It's worth noting that the first digit on a serial number from Radio Corp indicates the year, so only the following digits count. At the end of 1937, Radio Corp, having just become a very well-funded public company, ceased manufacturing of all private brands except Courtenay, so that it could focus on its new house brand, Columbus. This included a nationwide chain of Columbus radio centres for radio servicing and exclusive sales of Columbus sets, but unfortunately for those other brands, Pacific included, this meant they no longer had a manufacturer. Some of those brands ceased production altogether, while others found new companies to manufacture for them. But in a cruel twist, the owner of the Pacific Radio Company died around this time as well. And so the Pacific Radio Company would close its doors, although not quite for good. Within a year or two, the brand, motto and logo would be back in use, this time at the Acrad Radio Corporation in Waihi. It was apparently used there to replace the old Futura name as one of their house brands. But despite the name living on, the heyday of Pacific was over, and sets from the Acrad stable would be well engineered but disappointingly plain, with none of their former flair. The brand would carry on into the mid-50s when it seems to have fallen into disuse, a sad end to what was easily the brand with the best designed cabinets in New Zealand at one time.